Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Reap the Spoils. I'm Mark Sullivan.
I'm Delilah Lugo.
And I'm Jason Kwasnicki.
Hey, Jason, what are we talking about today?
We are talking about some hot DLC
Hot
for
DLC.
Final Fantasy XVI. There's no voice I can apply, like Resident Evil or something like that. There's no like iconic.
You gotta just like put
It's
on
like
your
I would have
best.
to hum. I would have to hum like some Uematsu's like
Well,
classic, like the Final
well,
Fantasy theme, but and
how,
it's
how
just
about
weird.
this? How about this? Try. Give me your best Ben Starr impression.
Final Fantasy. I can't. No, I can't do it because I can't get gravelly enough.
Final Fantasy 16. That was bad.
You guys
Sorry.
ever did? I don't think I ever sent it to
The
you. Did you ever see
dominance.
Ben Starr's audition for Mario?
No.
Where he just puts on
No.
his Clive voice and he's like, "It's a Mia, a Maria." He just repeats that like over and over again. He's like, "Who the fuck are you? It's a Mia, a Maria." Anyway, we're talking about Echoes of the Fallen and the Rising Tide, the two DLC episodes released for Final Fantasy XVI, a game that we played over a year ago. It's been a
God.
Yeah.
year.
That's
Jason, you've had a PS5 for a year now. How do you feel?
Not much different.
Yeah, I mean I feel like that could be a whole other conversation. Maybe we'll save that one for like a year end.
Oh yeah, that's a good
Bang.
idea.
Could be a fun talk. Anyway, are you guys ready for a brief info block about the
Yes.
Final Fantasy 16
Let's
DLC?
go do it.
All right. So,
History us.
as I
Pour
said,
your history on us.
Final Fantasy 16, that game, the game as a whole, the original video game, Final Fantasy XVI, that released on June 22nd, 2023. We did not actually get a DLC confirmation until September. Pre that confirmation, there were some debates from the production and development team. They did not have DLC planned during development, and they were kind of seeing what the temperament from the community was like prior to confirming or starting development on any DLC. Turns out a lot of people that liked Final Fantasy 16 really liked Final Fantasy 16 and wanted more of it. And they conveniently did leave some gaps in the lore of Valisthea to justify it. So yeah, we got the DLC confirmation in September of 2023. The first DLC, Echoes of the Fallen, was revealed and released on December 7th during the Game Awards. It was kind of a surprise drop. That was kind of a more budget price DLC at $10, I believe. And then The Rising Tide was also confirmed and then released on April 18th, 2024, this year, the year that we're recording at least. And I think that was I just bought the season pass or the expansion pass, whatever the hell they called it. So I don't remember how much I paid for that. Probably $30. So
Yeah, a little less than that.
yeah, something along those lines. So anyway, the original game was directed by Hiroshi Takai, but the DLCs switched hands and were directed by Takeo Kujiraoka, who worked on Dissidia Final Fantasy NT. He was the director on that. Not the best Dissidia to have on your resume, if I'm being totally honest. He was part of the lead, or a lead combat designer on 16, but he was also a battle system designer on Final Fantasy 13 2, battle planner for Final Fantasy 13, battle designer for Lightning Returns. He heavily was involved with the 13 trilogy, as well as some other past Final Fantasy games, including the first two Dissidias, but not as director. So that's
Had
kind
no
of his
idea.
yeah, and I didn't either until I was writing up the notes and doing some research. He,
Yeah,
I guess
that's interesting because a lot of the 13 people are over like CB1 outside of like top leadership is pretty much all 13 people. I mean, even some of the
yeah,
top leadership is 13 people.
yeah, with under like working with more directly with Nomura and Kitase and stuff like that.
Yeah, I
But yeah,
mean,
no.
remake was almost like a large chunk. So it was designed by what's director of 13. What was his name?
Geez, you're gonna make me do some more fact checking. Spot.
Toriyama.
That sounds
Why?
right. That sounds
Yeah.
right. I'm gonna get you an answer in one moment. It was Motomu Toriyama. That's correct.
Yeah.
Who more recently was a co-director on Final Fantasy VII Remake. He's also director on Ever Crisis. Apparently, that's news to me. Wasn't aware of that. But yeah, Dissidia NT. Uh, it's the latest Dissidia game. It was very different from the past two. No, not really an RPG, much more an arcade fighter. It was much more poorly received. Works okay enough as an arcade game, but not as a home console game. Um, I've spent way too much time suffering through Dissidia NT, but that's a story for another time.
I've never played a
Yeah, not
Dissidia
even I
game.
have dipped my toe into Dissidia, so
Hey, the first two Dissidias are fantastic. They are amazing, and it would be great if they were re-released. Dissidia NT, not really worth your time.
Mm.
But anyway, so yeah, that's the info block for the Final Fantasy XVI DLC. Are we
Great.
ready to spoil Echoes of the Fallen and the Rising Tide?
let's go. Delilah, you ready?
Yeah, let's go. Are we starting with like one and then the other,
Yeah,
or
yeah, because there is actually a narrative through line between the two of them. That
Yes, that is true.
isn't obvious until after you beat the Rising Tide and do a certain side quest. So yeah, let's
Although
start.
they do reference it, and the characters do
They do.
reference the first one throughout the other one.
Yeah, and it's not something I really put together until that reveal happens. But you're right. They do allude to it in Echoes of the Fallen. So let's start with Echoes of the Fallen. Obviously, they kind of have this. There's this what they call it, the Sage Spire. It's in Rosaria. It's in like that air, the Deadlands or whatever, where
The
everything
North.
is like.
They just kind of call it the North. For the
It's
most
got
part, there is a name though.
yeah, it's got like a name in Rosaria, and I forget what it's called.
It's like the
Um,
something lands, like the Barren Lands or something.
it is the. Hold on, I just
activates
saw it.
active time lore?
It's
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, that's basically what
Hit
I'm
the pause
doing.
button on this podcast. Yeah.
It's called the Dim. It's called the Dim. It's the very northern part of the map of Rosaria. It's where everything is so dead that you can't even use your magic in that area. Which is something I kind of wish that they had played with a little more in this DLC. Just given like more combat challenges that kind of uh, change the way you have to play around with it a little bit.
Yeah, there's
But
only that one fight with the goblins where they
yeah,
force
right.
you.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah, it's in there, and we kind of find out. Obviously, this DLC gives more background and lore for the Fallen, which is this game in this world's ancient civilization that is no longer around, as many Final Fantasies tend to have.
Mm.
So, I mean, I guess let's talk a little bit about the Sage Spire that's going to kind of inform, the rest of this DLC. It's one of the kind of narrative throughputs of of both of these DLCs, which is kind of this idea behind artificial power, man-made power versus natural power. What did you guys think of like this setting and this, I guess, kind of like the surface level story of this one?
I think it was made sense. Why wouldn't the humans, after going through all the bullshit that they were put through, not try to find a way to discover that technology, research it, and then create it for themselves? I say technology synonymously with magic because
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
used
they
as
kind of go
magic.
hand and as
Yeah,
Mark was alluding to, thematically, magic is compared to technology
yeah,
heavily in the main game. Yeah.
exactly. So, it makes sense that a group of people would do this. Seeing it towards after having played the entire game maybe doesn't sit as well, because I feel like that would have been something known. It wasn't like the second DLC where it was like really like hidden in some way.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like, especially Tomes, like Tomes knows everything. Like, shouldn't he have just known about this and been able to like say like, oh, we're actually not done with the
Well,
mother crystals?
I feel like they kind of established that the Sage Spire like was there, but it just kind of like it's been there. No one really knew how to enter it or get to it.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of like this mysterious, ominous obelisk that's
Yeah.
there in the dim that no one knows how to actually get to until somebody reveals themselves to know how to get to it and exploiting the resources they're finding in there, these dusk crystals
Hmm.
that are essentially like the crystal shards that you get from natural mother crystals, but since they're, you find out they're artificial because the sage spire is artificial, they kind of fade and die real fast.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They're
and
not
in the
as
main game they
powerful.
do like there are um what's the word I'm looking for? Not artifact, geographic like sites, and there are some artifacts as well. I mean, your hideout, the airship is a remnant of fallen civilization, I believe they say, and they do make references to the fallen throughout the game. This DLC kind of just chooses to go into that a little more, which I
Well,
think is cool from a world building perspective. And technically, Delilah, yes, you're right. Like we're playing this after we finish the game, but technically the mission becomes
Yeah.
available when or like right before you go to Origin. So like if someone is coming in playing for the first time, like a Game of the Year edition with the DLC or whatever,
yeah,
they
that
would
is
play it naturally.
that is kind of like an important thing to like bring up too. Is I think the choice to make both of these DLCs uh take place at the very end of the story but prior to the final boss, I think, it makes a lot of sense. That way they don't have to try and fit it in with everything else that's going on within the main plot of 16. They kind of just have it at the end where Ultima sit. Oh yeah, I guess I didn't say, but spoilers for the story of Final Fantasy 16.
Right.
I feel like you should probably know that before going into this episode, but you know, I guess
Yeah.
it's better late than never to bring that up. But Ultima's just kind of like waiting in Origin for you to come and contest him, because at the end of the day, Ultima is just waiting on Clive. He wants Clive's power. He wants Clive's to use him as his vessel. So um
Mythos.
it's like there's not really a sense of urgency right there at the end. I mean, there is, but there isn't. And then the decision, obviously, to make sure to force you to do two of like arguably the better side quests of the game, the ones where involving Joshua and Jill, especially
Hmm.
the Jill DLC, just so that they can be guaranteed companions with you for the two DLC chapters. I think it makes, it works. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, like with the Fallen, like the Fallen are obviously permeate themselves throughout the entirety of 16 story. You find out, what is it, Jamiel Falls, the scene of the battle between the Fallen and
Yeah, that's what I was referring to earlier. Like
yeah.
that plus the what is it called? The Indomitable, whatever the the second hideaway is, the airship.
Yeah,
Um,
I can't recall. I think you might be right, the Indomitable. But point being is, we know that the Fallen were basically wiped out by Ultima in the past, and now we kind of know why. Because they did seemingly like they did seemingly fly a little too close to the sun. They created an artificial mother crystal. They created an artificial icon, and they were making how many others that could have ascended to that type of power. So Ultima ultimately, no pun intended there, fucking slammed them down. Um, and we get to kind of see that power and fight against it. What'd you guys think of Ultima?
I'm gonna
It
let
was
Delilah
it
go
was
first.
fun.
Yeah.
It was a fun fight. I enjoyed it. It wasn't as much of a spectacle as fighting the other real icons. But from a combat perspective, I quite enjoyed it, and the music was fun. It was very Capcom.
It's really funny that you bring up it was really Capcom, because the melody or leitmotif that's playing through that song is one that is used in several 14 songs. So Jason,
Right. There's a
I know
yeah
you were freaking out about that. I
yeah
was
because
freaking out about that.
there's for those who don't play 14, which is probably a lot of people listening, and Delilah. Like there's a whole raid there's a whole raid series tied to Omega.
But
And
well,
yeah,
to
and he looks
be
almost
clear,
yeah.
that melody isn't like only used for Omega.
Oh no, I know.
Yeah.
But but yeah, like Delilah said, I actually appreciate the fact that they didn't make it a straight up icon fight because it allowed for what I think is one of the best mechanically designed fights in the game. For just the base combat, I had a shit ton of fun with that Omega fight. And the fights preceding it, I did like the noticeable increase in difficulty with the mechanics versus the base game. And honestly, that's where this DLC and the other one I would say with the notable exception that I'm sure we'll get to,
Yeah, we will. We will.
excelled was just the combat. I found myself immediately getting back right in, like my rotation that I had set up, and when I played through it for the first time, just came back like muscle memory. I forgot how good it felt to play this game, um, and giving you those fights, and especially that Omega fight, to now play with your toys and with that ramped up difficulty, I felt like I had a really good time with that gameplay.
Yeah, I thought Omega was a really, really fun fight technically, and even the spectacle was there. Not super cinematic or anything, but just like the spectacle of it all. You're fighting Omega in this like really fast paced, like high octane and
It's
you know
flashy. He's flying
it.
around during certain
Yeah,
mechanics. He's shooting a whole bunch of lasers. Got a
yeah,
lot of laser attacks going on simultaneously while you're trying to navigate the mechanics. Yeah,
and there's lots of mechanics to kind of learn and engage with and stuff. I thought it was really I really did enjoy that fight. I'd say the one slight disappointment is that even though he's an artificial icon, and maybe it's because he was an artificial icon created by the Fallen, we didn't get him as an iconic
Oh,
Yeah.
Omega, the
ability,
Omega
you know?
abilities. Yeah. That
I
would
mean,
have
I
been
feel like
so
that could have
cool.
been pretty neat, yeah. Um, but I get it because I get it from a narrative perspective because the whole idea behind Clive being Mythos is to reabsorb and obtain Ultima's power and become Ultima's new vessel that kind of re-obtains all that power. And all of that power comes from the icons that were created from him. So since Omega wasn't created from him, it wouldn't really make narrative sense.
Yeah.
Unless they tried to contrive something that could have, I don't know, it just could have
I
been
would.
And
neat.
maybe
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Delilah.
maybe there's someone out there looking to become the dominant of Omega and figure out how to
Yeah,
how to
maybe.
somehow artificially put that into a bloodline.
Right. Or, what they could have done instead of it being an iconic ability, make it a weapon that
Well,
actually did something different,
I was about to say because
Yeah.
of the Omega weapon you get from beating him the sword, it's more powerful than anything that was in the Leviathan DLC. I don't know, or at least
Well,
in the base DLC.
it's not more
Um,
powerful. It's not more powerful if you've already played through the game twice and got
right.
Ultima Weapon.
Yeah, no, I know. That's why I was about to qualify it with I've only played through the
Yeah.
game once. But
Yeah.
given how powerful it was relative to, if this was your first time going through, add some kind of special, laser, um, not necessarily ability, but effects that triggers if you execute some sort of mechanic correctly while using it.
Yeah.
But that Omega sword is
Cool.
fucking dope looking.
Yeah, it is cool looking, but it ultimately was just glamour for me. And
Hmm.
I assume Delilah.
Yeah. Well, I didn't play the game on hard mode. That was around the time when I started quitting my trophy hunting journey.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I only played the base game, but I did feel like in the once we got to Leviathan, maybe there was another weapon that I was or did I use that weapon? Actually, I might have used that weapon the whole Leviathan DLC actually, because yeah,
Yeah,
you're
so did
right,
I.
Jason. There wasn't anything stronger, so I was
It's
able to enjoy it.
even the Leviathan sword. It's like still 5 points stronger on
Yeah,
both, I believe.
yeah, that I do remember that.
It was weaker than Ultima and Omega weapon for me, but I still put it on just for,
Fashion.
narrative. Yeah, just for narrative consistency. I got this new weapon. I guess I'm going to use it even though it's 15 strength and willpower weaker.
Mm.
Um But yeah, and the other character, I guess we'll circle back on him. Is Famiel, who alludes to being from a forgotten civilization or a lost civilization. He's the one that found a way into the Sage Spire, selling dust crystals to get by. And we'll circle back on him, I suppose. But yeah, there's really not that. This was really more of just a short, breezy. Like it was an easy one for them to get out quickly. Obviously, they confirmed DLC in September. This was out in December. So it's budget priced. It's breezy. It's mostly combat related or oriented.
Yeah, it's basically like a dungeon and some extra features for the game.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I like, well, just like narrative wise, I like that they had to like use living beings in order to create this artificial mother crystal. Because I was
Yeah.
thinking, why didn't all the other smart people of this world like try and do something like that, right? But then I guess it would be like a moral decision to do that with living beings. So that kind of makes it a little bit make more sense why it would be so exclusive to just the fallen.
Mhm.
But I think ultimately, if this was $10 originally, for me personally, and I don't like to put like price to value,
Oh
but
boy.
I think this should have been
Dollars
a
per
free
hour. Yeah.
DLC. I think
Oh.
this one
Oh.
should have been free. Yeah.
Okay. 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 But yeah, you do bring up a good point. Something we kind of, I guess we're gonna breeze right past. But yeah, that the fact that they had these monsters that they were trying to turn into crystals, and I guess like I feel like it was a little dodgy on, or not dodgy, but like doesn't make too much effort to try and explain why the inside of the Sage Spire was so like fleshy, almost like Resident Evil like,
Yeah.
with how just kind of gross it was in there.
Like HR Geiger kind of.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Mhm.
but like I guess that could be just the power of these artificial crystals they were trying to create, like kind of overtaking the flesh. It almost like it's like Videodrome body horror up in there.
Yeah.
Um,
Which I appreciated. I very much appreciated the aesthetic both of this and the other DLC, and I had kind of forgotten how beautiful the game was. Maybe because it was PS5 exclusive, not on PS4. But again, as Mark said earlier, a discussion
what are
for
you
another time.
throwing shade at?
No, just saying that they made the game not having to make it compatible with PS4.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I thought the way you said that, it sounded like you were throwing shade at something. I'm like, we haven't
because
played
it's
anything.
a contentious discussion, but I
That's
don't want to.
no, that's fine.
Yeah,
That's fine. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
But
yeah. I gotcha.
my only point was originally was to say that I very much appreciated the aesthetic of the Sage Spire, and also when we get to it, the other DLC,
Yeah, I mean,
Mercidia, and I just forgot how beautiful the game was just walking around. And I
hmm
do appreciate just visually. You mentioned like how fleshy and like HR Geigery it is. I
yeah,
thought it was really cool they did that rather than go with like a straight up just sci-fi. Like this is just a lab in the middle of a fantasy world. Like no,
Yeah.
their technology feels like more like a fantasy technology might think.
yeah,
It's
and
like
it's not
there's
like
organic nature to it.
we didn't engage with like fallen technology in the base game too. So it's not like that aspect of it wasn't like totally new, but it was kind of like the aesthetic of this place in particular, and learning more about like what the intention behind the Sage Spire was that really kind of
Right.
made it
It,
stand
it
out.
it looks like what the Indomitable might have looked at like when it was operating. We just inhabit it as a relic, but it
Maybe
just
minus
looked
all the
visually
yucky flesh and stuff.
and test tubes, yeah. But the test tubes, they're not even like they're like built into the architecture. It was just
Yeah.
I paused. I don't generally outside of like the art design, I
hmm
don't really pay attention to like graphical fidelity. But I just remembered, how beautiful the game was. Kind of took me back for a second. I took it all in. I
Yeah.
appreciated it.
Nice, nice. That's
Yeah.
good.
I like the way it looks too.
I mean, speaking of, beautiful visuals, I say we move on to the next DLC because I feel like Mysidio was really gorgeous at times.
Oh yeah.
And it
Yep.
was also, finally super cool. We get the tease of Leviathan the Lost in the base game. And Joshua was looking at the whatever it was, it was almost like a fresco of the of Mythos and the ultimate being with all the icons surrounding it and stuff. What I guess Ultima's true form, if you wanted to call it that. Leviathan's there, but where's Leviathan? We don't know. He's been gone for 100 years or so. And
Yeah.
you see that frozen wave off in the distance from the shores of Sambrek, and that was in the base game. You saw it, but you couldn't go there. Now we
Right.
can, because we got this mysterious letter from
Yes.
somebody begging us to come save the dominant of Leviathan. So what do you guys think of I guess Shula and or generally this DLC story, as a whole? Because I
Oh,
do feel like we got more meat with this one than we did with Echoes of the Fallen for sure.
yeah, I mean, I thought both DLCs added to the lore and the world building, which in the original game was already fantastic. So this is just like more of that. Visually, I definitely thought Mysidia was gorgeous. It was one of the places that wasn't affected by the blight, so you were actually able to see life in a way. Or is that what they call it in this game? The blight? I forget what they call it. It's
Yeah,
the
it's
Yeah,
the
blight in a
blight.
lot of
Yeah,
other games. Okay.
yeah.
Um, and so it was, really pretty to see that and just the wave in the background. And later, when you're about to fight Leviathan, seeing the water spout tornado, that was just sick. Visually, I took lots and lots of screenshots because it just continued to be beautiful, which the original game was as well. Story wise, I mean, I thought it was pretty cool that the dominant of Leviathan was an 80-year-old infant. you know, like that's really funny and
Definitely
also
a
very
cool
anime.
subversion. Yeah, yeah. No, it was definitely like a cool subversion, unexpected, and I wouldn't have guessed like if anything I would have guessed that maybe if we ever did see Leviathan's dominant, it would be a child, but not an infant, not a newborn frozen in time.
Yeah.
right. And as Joshua says in the dialogue, he was young when he first, whatever it's called, spark charge, whatever, primed. Sorry,
Prime,
that's
yeah.
what.
Mhm.
But to be an infant and not even understand what's going on, yeah.
Yeah.
I
And
will
like
say. Oh, sorry.
no, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
I was just going to say, going back to Shula, I do wish, obviously, it's difficult because, as Delilah said, it's a fucking 80-year-old infant frozen in time. I do wish that there was a bit more of a personal connection with Shula, other than, she's the leader and she goes and sees this baby. Because, like, making
Well,
an infant is kind of like a narrative ploy to try to create some instant sympathy and connection with the audience to get them invested. I just wish there was a little more to it to have you invested, other than, well, it's an infant that's been kind of cruelly taken advantage of, which
well,
works
you
well enough.
do
But
they do establish that Shula is a descendant from Walius. Like
yeah, I know, I know.
she is related to him, like,
No, I
but
know, but I still wish there were. And again, it's difficult because you're playing with time, so
yeah,
it's hard. I get it.
Let me
yeah.
make sure I understand.
Hmm.
Wasn't Walius Shula's great great grandfather's son, which would
Something
make
Something,
something like that.
yeah,
him
something
her
along those
great
lines,
grandfather or something?
or great grand uncle, maybe.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
maybe
like,
maybe something like that could have been, maybe she had to redeem the honor of her great great uncle because
well,
he reluctantly participated in the plot. So it was kind of like a family shame that felt, rather than just a generic shame that.
they kind of established that the motes of water, like, I feel like they kind of insinuate or play it up as they're sort of as a civilization, they are a family, right? And for this to be a living relative that's just frozen in time, a very, very distant descendant, um, but also just part of this wider community, that tried to do something really, really horrible. Create another artificial mother crystal, although slightly less artificial than the one that the Fallen tried to create. Um, but they tried to do it by sacrificing a child,
Right.
and she is trying to redeem that, whether or not it's necessarily the fault of her distant descent or a relative, or just her general community and the tribe that she's a part of. I feel like no matter what, she is trying to redeem the sins of the father in a way.
Yeah. I guess what I'm being nitpicky here. I'll freely admit that. I guess what I'm really just trying to get at is I wish there was a bit more given to her motivation is all.
Fine.
That's really all I was trying to say. Because she's fine as like the instigator of the plot. Okay, now we got this guy Sid who goes over like for the first time in 80 years. There's someone going around killing dominants and sucking their icons out. So this
Yeah.
seems like the perfect guy to solve this situation. Because otherwise you'd be asking why did she specifically, why is she the one that goes to look for help? Well, it's because now she knows, everybody in the world knows there's this dude going around killing dominants and icons and killing crystals.
Yeah. I guess man, I was gonna bring something up and I lost it. Oh, the thing that I kind of wish I was a little different. If this is such a closed off society, in spite of the fact that they need the help and they know of Clive as this dominant Reaper or so, or at least Icon Reaper, um, for this society to just be so welcoming of them coming, I feel like
Yes,
this kind
yes.
of plays into a problem with 16 as a whole. Is there's not a whole lot of people that are unwelcoming of Clive. They're just all, other than like, the very clear antagonists, like everyone is just kind of like super nice and kind to Clive, in spite of the world that they're in, or in spite of the person that he is, status wise.
Especially
There's
when
like
you
that one
consider that he's
cutscene.
he's interacting with a lot of like underworldly elements that you think would
Mhm.
be a little more cautious. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, there's like that one instance in the main story where like after the 5-year time jump, where he's acting as Sid and frees all those bears and they get pissed at him. But that happens in a cutscene. You go and talk to anybody and they're nice to him. Any side
Mhm.
quest isn't no one's really that antagonistic of him. And for this story to just be like this community, the Moats of Water, is just so welcoming of Clive coming to this their very hidden and separated society. It is a little off-putting.
Yeah, especially when you consider that this society, it seems to take some inspiration from like other real world, what's the word I'm looking for? Um, kind of in inward facing sounds right. I don't know what the word to describe it, but society like small groups, ethnic groups like Jews or Kurds that have been shunned by greater, because the whole backstory is that they were cast out by the Gregorian Church of Simbarek, and they were named heretics, so they kind of were people without a home. So you kind of immediately get those vibes, and those societies tend, because of their experience, to be very closed off. So I do agree with you there.
Well, going back even further though, before that even happens, they were forced. They came from Ash, from the other
Right.
continent, and were forced to go to Storm, not because they were being oppressed, but because their mother crystal died and their
Right.
land was dying. That's how they became nomadic, and then the Gregorian Church, became a problem as they were trying
Yeah.
to migrate and find
Yeah.
a new
So it's just a
place.
history of being fucked over. Therefore, the
Yeah,
societies like that tend to be very skeptical of outsiders. Yeah.
yeah.
And they
The
were skeptical of outsiders, just not Clive. Like I think
Yes.
there was a
Yes.
side quest where the girl was like in love with one of the guys that she
Hervey.
was serving. Yeah, that she
I
was
fucking love
serving.
that side quest actually, just because I found it so like it was a moment of levity that really did hit.
Yeah.
Where this dude is just simping so hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And she had to like beg everyone. She was hiding the fact that she was with this guy. She was basically getting a job in a whole different place. She was working at the brothel, right? I think that's how she met this guy at what's her
Yes.
name's brothel? I forget.
the
The
dame.
Isabel?
dame.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the dame. Um and yeah, that was really cool, but then I guess Shiva, sorry. What's her name?
Shula.
Shula, sorry. These names. Shula was just like, "Oh yeah, he's with me. He's fine. He's going to save everything." And I guess everyone just accepted it with no questions asked.
That is true because part of my favorite part of that quest is the end when what's her Isabel, whatever, when you finally find Hervey and she's like, all right, we're gonna bring you back, but the town has to judge you and decide
Yeah.
whether or not you can stay. And then he has that great line, love perseveres through all. It's just a
Yeah.
really funny like fucking line. but it does point out like the problem you guys are both talking about, which is why was there not part of this storyline where like Clive has to be judged by the
Yeah.
town?
It's the chest, man. It's
Yeah.
just
Everyone has the hots for him.
his big broad pecs. No one's gonna question or distrust him. They're gonna get
Yeah.
absorbed into those man titties. All right, anyway. Continuing on. Let's go back to Wallius and the general story of this DLC. This spell that's freezing him in time. I don't know how I feel about the idea that they're like frozen in time. Shiva. It makes so much sense. I don't know. I've never really associated Shiva with time magic, so I find that to be a bit of a weird contrivance that I'm not sure I'm into. What do you guys think about that?
I mean, so from a surface level, like if there was any element that would mess with time, it would be ice, right? Because cryogenic, whatever they did
But
it to
at that
the baby's 80, blah blah blah.
But at that point, I feel like he should be literally frozen, encased in ice, not just frozen in time by a spell, a
Right.
time spell, you
Yeah,
know? To
I,
me,
ge-
that doesn't cry Shiva.
I get I get where you're coming from, but at the end of the day, the story is that this witch, who obviously was kind of revealed to be Shiva's former dominant,
Yeah.
this witch created a spell. So like it's kind of left vague, and it involves Shiva's power. It's not the biggest. I understand, and if you really want to nitpick, sure, but
Hmm.
it works for I guess what the plot is trying to set up, which is really just that there's this child that's been frozen for 80 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. I mean, yeah, I find it a little silly. Like the
It
solution.
doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt anything else for me in the story. You know what I'm saying? Like I can agree with you, but at the same time, like it's not really like hurting anything else.
No,
Like
it's
some
not.
other elements of this DLC we'll get
But
to, but
but to me, that's why it just seems so silly. Like, if anything, have him be encased in ice and the wave be frozen in ice, and the thing to come and
sure,
unfreeze it is the fucking fire dominant or the
sure, I
fire
get you. I,
dominance, you know?
yeah, I get you. And I might even agree with you, but I think probably the thought behind that is just that water just like water is still not still water, active water, frozen where it was versus a bunch of ice, which I believe we already saw in the main story at one point. Huge thing of ice. Um, just looks cooler. I don't know. That probably
I
it
don't
was
know.
probably just a real cool decision.
I mean, I looking at the frozen wave, in the main game, seeing it from a distance, I never thought it was just frozen in time. I just thought it was frozen, it was ice. And it kind of makes sense because it's in the Northern Territories where Shiva's dominant typically or historically has come from. It's typically a colder area. To me, it just made more sense to it would have made more sense to just have it be frozen in ice. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know. Time magic is just a strange thing to bring to bring in this late into the game. You know what I mean?
Yeah, especially
Um,
because it's so powerful.
yeah. And then like also learning this is I think learning through a side quest, but I think the timekeeper was like a knight admirer of that witch, that former dominant of Shiva. Like he wasn't like related to her or involved with her, but I think he admired her or I think they admired each other in
Mm.
some regard. I think one of the side quests kind of explores that, but um
I think the main thing was just to have sh- that fight with the ice abilities with a knight and be able to say, okay, it's kind of like this old dominance version of Torgal.
yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of, I guess, what I have to say about the time magic stuff. But actually, fighting Leviathan, getting down to that, freeing Wallius of this prison, and thus freeing Leviathan from it, so that it could go on the rampage that it was trying to go on 80 years prior.
Before we get just real quick,
Go ahead.
like I was not so much like befuddled by the Shiva time magic stuff. More like Shula could just walk up to it and somehow, even though this was a spell created by the Switch, that I guess we can't really replicate, because if so, that has massive implications. Like, let's just freeze Origin, in
Yeah.
time. But she's just kind of like able to deactivate it. I don't, what was it specific? Can maybe I missed something? Did she
There was
say she
like
was doing?
there was like the Ver or whatever, and that's what was powering the spell. And
She said she was like sucking the aether out of it, but not too much or something. I don't remember.
yeah, I don't know. I feel like I just tuned that. I feel like I tuned that part out because it didn't feel like it was a super important thing to take note of, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
again, this is like just like the Shiva free stuff. This is just nitpicking. It is like, but at the end of the day, it's a plot point to move the plot along
Yeah.
to get
Yeah.
you to Leviathan.
I did enjoy the explanation of it only froze what was there at the time, the spell at that what was the Air of Hours. Um so anything that was there, it froze in time, but anything else could enter and still be free, which explains, why we can enter and thus why we have to fight stuff in there because they just kind of strolled on in like it was nobody's business and we had to take them out.
Yeah.
Um but yeah, some also just like damn, some of the enemy encounters, at least on Final Fantasy difficulty, pretty tough.
They were tough in normal mode. I died
Mm, okay.
a couple times,
Yeah.
not just a couple times, repeatedly.
Like those temple
Well,
curls, those were like a real pain in my ass.
yeah, in both DLCs, the bosses were faster,
Hmm.
mechanics a little more difficult to keep up with. Um,
Which is
although,
good. You don't really want it to be too breezy.
yeah, yeah, and I was enjoying it all until we're now getting into Leviathan.
Yeah.
It's hard to separate out how many times I died on Leviathan versus
Yeah,
the rest of the
Leviathan was the
DLCs,
only one that I died to.
and it was not at all satisfying.
Yeah,
No.
and there's some reasons for that. But like, all right, so at least the spectacle of the fight, we can admit, like, it was another icon versus icon fight. You're playing as Ifrit the whole time, going up against Leviathan. Like that
Yeah, I mean,
aspect is all. Those fights are always cool. They're always spectacle. They're always like visually driven by some really cool action sequences. If you know still very much like on rails, maybe too simple. Although Final Fantasy difficulty again did make the fight pretty challenging.
mhm.
Um, go ahead, Jason. You look like you want to say something.
I was only going to say that of all the icon fights in the game, I was definitely disappointed with this one.
Oh,
It
okay,
was,
okay.
in my opinion, the worst of all the icon fights.
See, I felt like it was a more technical icon fight. I feel like a lot of the icon fights in the base game were a little too spectacle driven on rails, just like you're kind of on this tunnel path or whatever, and you just kind of have to dodge when they attack and attack when there's an opening. And this one had actual mechanics. Not to say the base game didn't have icon fights that had those, but this one felt like a good middle ground of spectacle and technical.
I can see what you're saying, like especially the part where you have to use one of the specific powers to like get out of this, I don't know, black hole in the water that Leviathan was creating.
Mhm.
I forgot what the move is called. It starts with a B. Um
Oh, the
that
brimstone. Yeah.
Brimstone, there you go. You had to use brimstone. I had to look that shit up because had they used mechanics like that throughout the game, then I would have been more like, okay, well, what ability can I use uh to circumvent this attack, right? And I would have been more used to that. But because it was only introduced in this DLC, my brain was just like, I don't need to do that.
Are you
Why
talking
do
about
I?
like the big water tornado?
No, so what
No,
she's
the
talking
Oh,
water.
about
okay.
is, and I agree with her. I actually didn't know this until after the fight. I just
Hmm.
tanked that mechanic every time it came up because I was confused. Because the one right before it, you have to dodge through the rings, but then
Yeah,
as
Yeah.
the fight goes on and it gets faster, the whirlpool just shows up,
the
and
whirlpool. Thank you.
you actually have to time brimstone correctly in order to block it.
Oh,
Which I tried and fucked up, so I didn't realize I was using the right ability, but just not timing it correctly.
if I'm
So
thinking of the right thing, you could also just use standard dodges
no,
because
it sucks
I,
you back in and damages you
I
because it's
okay.
too big for you to get out before it it triggers.
Well, there is a whirlpool attack that he would use that if you just pause a moment and then do 3 dodges, you dodge like the
Yes.
attacks in that whirlpool or
No,
whatever.
this is the different one. This is the one with like it's black in the middle.
Looks like a black hole.
Yeah.
Like
Okay.
that's why I described it that way. The one you're thinking of has like a bunch of lasers and little pools around it, and it's just like one big area.
Maybe I'm not.
He doesn't do it often,
feel
but
like
he
there's
did
a
it.
shit ton of
The
mechanics
one
and
the one
attacks
you're
in that,
the
in
one
that
you're
fight.
the one you're thinking of, Mark, is the one where Leviathan, if you don't Leviathan comes up from underneath. Whereas the one that Delilah was
No,
talking
I'm
about.
not thinking of that one. I'm definitely not thinking of that one.
Okay. Well, whichever one you're thinking of,
Mhm.
I know what you're talking about. Yes, there is one you can dodge out. The one Delilah's talking about is very rare until you start getting later in the fight, and the mechanics just come back to back to back faster.
Okay. Anyway,
So basically, you have to use brimstone to successfully dodge that attack without tanking it, where you're taking a bunch of health off. And I wish they would have used something like that with the other icon abilities throughout the game so that my brain could have known to experiment with that kind of stuff. But that wasn't even like my biggest criticism of that fight. My biggest criticism of the fight was that one phase, I think it was phase 2 or 3,
the water
where
tornado.
no, not the
No,
water
the
tornado.
DPS check.
The,
The DPS check.
the
Oh,
big
the DPS
ball, the
check.
big
Yeah,
ball
Okay.
that
the
he
DPS
has.
That
check.
that
That's
is
the
one of
only.
2 things that are bullshit. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the only part of this fight where I died, and I died at least 10 times.
Because you got to be using, at least when I was going through that, because I did fail that a couple times. You have to use like the follow-up magic burst attack when you do your standard combo, because that does more damage and will actually allow you to make that DPS check.
Not just that. You also have to properly be using your abilities at the right time. So
Oh
you can't
yeah,
you
that
can't
too.
you can't just close the gap at first. You have, because you need the cooldowns to come up, so you get a
Yeah,
certain amount of abilities. So you have to use your ranged fire breathing attack
the
as soon
wildfire.
as the
Yeah.
fight begins to trigger the cooldown. You
I didn't
can't
have
just you can't just go in and close the gap
So
immediately.
probably so you probably I wouldn't say that you need to do that because I didn't do that. I didn't do that until I got up close and personal. But if you do the standard combo and then the 2 magic bursts timed right after your combo, if you keep doing that while supplementing with your other abilities, you will meet the
Yeah.
DPS check. You don't necessarily have to start off with the range from far away. That being said, though, I agree that it's a little too tight of a DPS check. Even the DPS check, man, the DPS check at the end of Omega, I thought it was gonna fail, and I feel like I don't know if the fight was designed to make it feel like you were
It's
meeting it
designed to make,
by
yeah,
the skin of
no.
your teeth,
It's because
but
of all the graphics that are going on around you. It makes you look like you're in much more dire straits than you are.
yeah, and
With
you're dodging attacks, and the arena's like closing in on you, and it's like, oh my god, am I actually gonna
Yeah,
do this? And I just managed to pull it off.
which is part of, the greatness of the design of that fight, as opposed to here, where you need to, in order, even on normal mode, in order to hit the damage check, you need to use each of your abilities a certain amount of time. So, and
Again,
at intervals during that DPS check, you'll get blown back, including if you're in the middle of an ability. So if you're in the middle of an ability and it just
yeah.
suddenly triggers the pushback and you don't get to use that ability, you've automatically failed the DPS check, and there's no way to just restart it. You got to go all the way
I
through to the animation of the tidal wave. It's a fucking pain in the ass.
I still imagine, especially if on normal difficulty, I still imagine if you're doing the combo follow-up thing that I keep talking about,
Yeah,
it
and I
probably
was
would have
doing
been
that.
more
Yeah.
comfortable. It probably would have been a more comfortable
No,
DPS check.
I was doing that. You got to use each of your abilities. I think was it 3 or 4 times? I can't
3
remember.
times. What
3 times, yeah.
the window the window was just too short, but
Yeah.
Mark, I wonder if it's cuz I don't know if playing on hard mode and doing everything gives you extra like better equipment that would make your DPS a little stronger, and that's why you might have been more comfortable doing that part.
I don't know. I mean, look, I'll agree with you guys that if you don't use everything in your kit, including the combo follow-up ability, like you're not gonna make it. And that is kind of like it's forcing you to engage with the game and everything that the game is providing to you. But at the same time, it's like your skill set is a little limited with Ifrit, and it's kind of forcing you into a very specific play style in order to make sure you meet an arbitrary DPS check.
Yeah.
I feel like a DPS check like that made more sense with the Omega fight, not so much with the Ifrit and Leviathan fight.
Oh, with the Omega fight, it was like, it was tension building. It was like, oh yeah, this is
Yeah.
cool. Like, let me like spam like all these like crazy attacks. Whereas this fight, it didn't feel, I didn't feel that tension. It was just like, oh yeah, by the way, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and it was like, what the fuck, you know?
Right. And it's not even like the mechanics that are happening during the DPS check are hard to, deal with or avoid. It's more that, you're dealing successfully with the mechanics. You're successfully using all these abilities and these specific attack combos. You're doing the maximum damage you can. But if, it's really artificial difficulty in the sense that it's such a short time span and so much damage has to be dealt that if you don't execute it 100% the way the game wants it done, I guess you could say, and even one mistake will send you have to wait out even if you know you failed because you missed one of your
Yeah, there's no
executions on
restart last
right.
checkpoint.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's just
exactly.
frustrating and it's a giant roadblock in the middle of the fight.
And it was good the first time around because you get to actually like see the tidal wave, which is a really cool attack, I think. But then having to do it like over and over again and having to wait each time, I would just let him kill me at that point,
Right,
just to like
same,
expedite it. But it was just annoying. It didn't feel satisfying, and I felt like it made it my least favorite icon for that reason. Because like aesthetically, the arena was cool and the icon looked really cool, and the story behind it was, really good. But other than that, I was like the combat of it was just not as good. Like certain parts were cool, like when he throws the big giant water spout tornado at you and you have to like dodge away or and like Dragon Ball your way out of the way. But
See, that's the part that I have more of an issue with than the DPS check.
really,
Yeah, because I tried dodging away from that using whatever the dash ability is. If we're calling it Brimstone, that might be it. But I
no,
tried.
brimstone is the circle that it's an explosion that does damage, but it
Okay, so
also if you
not
get
so
hit,
not that one then.
the
The
Dragon
dat
Ball Z run.
Yeah,
yeah,
the
the
Dragon
fire
Ball
run.
Z run. Yeah, that one. Dashing away from it, that's what you're supposed to do, but in a very specific direction, otherwise it's gonna get you. And I don't like that because I
Oh,
kept going the wrong way, thinking I was doing the right thing. It killed me like 3 times, and you have to do a part of the fight every time you die before you get back to that section. And I was getting so frustrated. I looked it up, and people were like, "Oh, dash toward the bottom right of your screen." And the first time I do that is when it worked, and I lived.
it's
And I'm like, "What
crazy.
the fuck?
I f-
Why is this a problem?"
I feel like me and you fought a different boss
We
because
really
for
did.
that part, I
That
just
was
ran to the left. I just
so did
Dragon
I.
Ball Z to the left and I was fine.
I
And I
didn't even
never
Dragon
once got
Balls.
hit by it.
I didn't even use. I think it's called wildfire. The dash with the fire.
Yeah, whatever
I
it's called. Yeah.
I didn't even use that. I just used normal dash and went to the left. Yeah, I didn't have any
Oh,
problems with that.
I
yeah.
I
That's crazy.
that's the part that I'm just like, this is so stupid. I do not
I
understand why this is
And
an
again,
issue.
a lot of this would have like if you didn't have the DPS check, you kind of for a DPS check you kind of have to have instant death, but for a lot of these attacks because of how hard they hit, um, like it's very unforgiving in terms of learning the mechanics, especially when a lot of them get thrown at you at once.
Yeah.
Whereas I didn't feel that way with Omega.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
same. I wonder because Mark, you play this on the hardest difficulty, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I wonder if they scale specific sections differently based on the difficulty.
I don't know. I
Like
mean, I
maybe
kind
the
of
AoE is bigger for the water spout, but then when it comes to the like DPS attack, it's like maybe I don't know, more forgiving maybe.
I have no
Yeah,
idea,
and
but
on
yeah,
top of
it is interesting that I had less of a I had less trouble and less of a problem with the DPS check than you guys, but a simple thing as dashing away from a fucking tornado just
Yeah,
frustrated me so much because I
that's
kept dying to
crazy.
it.
and there are other aspects of the fight like Leviathan's animations because of how awkward it is. It's hard to time the dodges. Just
Like
because
yeah,
it's hard to tell
that's
when he's actually attacking, which is funny because in Omega he has his arms are kind of tentacly, but I was able to dodge and tell when the attack, when the proper time was perfectly.
I don't know.
So
I feel like I didn't really have much trouble with that with Leviathan. This is really interesting, like the difference between our experiences with this fight.
Yeah, I didn't
But-
really have trouble with any of the other movements or like kind of reading his
Yeah,
attacks. It was just those two really
yeah,
that bothered me.
yeah,
yeah.
same. I didn't like die to any physical attacks. It was like I said, I only died during that DPS check and over and
mean,
over and over again.
I probably died a few times to like physical attacks just because if you get hit by one thing, at least on Final Fantasy difficulty, it takes away like a third to a
Wow.
half of your
Yeah,
health.
on normal mode, I was getting hit for like half my health bar chunks.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
and you
Okay,
only get
sure.
like the 6 things.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, yeah, I mean, we talked a lot about how the Leviathan fight was. But how about Leviathan's powers? Do you guys use those a lot?
Yeah, I actually enjoyed it quite a bit. I like that they added this long range kind of shooter option to it. It felt very Splatoon.
Yeah, they gave you a fucking water shotgun, water
Yeah.
cannon, like
Yeah,
And
pretty
of
cool.
all of the, I guess like I'll call them passive abilities because they're not like special attacks. They're more like combat specific ways of traversing. Like for Shiva's, it's like a teleportation, and for Bahamut, you get the wings. It's not necessarily an attack. It's just like a
It's their, I think they call them like iconic ability or whatever.
yeah. It's an iconic. Yeah, exactly. It's an ability.
It's like
It's not
the
an attack.
static ability that you always get when you equip an
yeah,
icon. Yeah.
like
Right.
the Shiva Cold Snap Dodge. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Army of Darkness, whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah.
I found that one to be the most useful from the perspective of like if my other two abilities were on cooldown, I could just start shooting that out and it would do pretty good damage in my opinion. And I also found the big giant water tunnel to be super powerful. As like a DPS power attack. Like I would do Shiva's big ice attack that takes a lot of stagger away,
Yeah.
and then do that attack to like get their health down really quickly.
Talking about Tsunami, like Leviathan's
Tsunami, yeah.
like strongest or strong like ultimate ability, if we want to call them that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I always forget the names.
No, it's fine. I just wanted to make sure I knew what you're talking about because there was also that the other I used like all of Leviathan skills throughout this whole thing because I liked them all a lot. Um, there's the one that has like the walls of water close in on enemies to
Mhm.
kind of bring them into a single kind of single file row in front of you.
Yeah.
And I really liked that. You could like there were like it really added to the combinations you could use with the other pre-existing abilities. Like you could use that one to close everyone in single file and then use Mega Flare to just blast them all away.
Mhm.
Um or Tsunami for frankly, because it would just put them all in a straight line in front of you. It
Yeah.
was very useful in that regard. The one skill, I forget, it was like Abyssal Tear, I think,
Mhm.
where it creates a passive bubble over your shoulder that grows in strength over time and even faster if you dodge things. And then it'll just like blast every enemy in the once you reactivate it to kind of release everything, all the power that it builds up. Like
Not to
Mhm.
be
it just
confused with Abyssal Drain.
no,
Mark should get that.
I wouldn't confuse anything with that horrible ability, that horrible skill.
For those who don't know, Final Fantasy
God,
XIV
do I have
reference.
to explain Abyssal Drain
No,
now?
you don't.
Okay,
I
Abyssal
was.
Drain is a Dark
No, you
Knight
don't.
skill.
You don't have to. You don't have to explain it. I thought I would get a rise out of you, but you seem
It's
it took you a few seconds to
here.
process it.
Here's what I'll say. Abyssal Drain is Dark Knight's healing skill, and it sucks ass. Anyway, we can go back. We can go back to 16
Yeah.
now, so I don't have to get depressed.
I guess that's all I really have to say about the Leviathan build is I'm glad you guys enjoyed it, and I can see the appeal of it. But after, like in that first fight, right after you get them, it forces you to use it.
Yeah.
I just really hated it.
Oh my
I did
god.
not. I was not feeling it. I think I was just stuck in my ways. I used the same build that I used was using at the end of the base game is the one I used throughout both DLCs. I got all my rhyme, my the thunderbolt, all my AoE crowd
Yeah.
control abilities, and then plus my Army of Darkness, Sensu's Senken, and my Bahamut. I basically just stuck with the same build I had. I had my Shiva dodge, the cold snap, my Garuda grab. I didn't feel like
Well,
changing anything up.
well, you know what I'm gonna say, Jason, is this is a perfect opening for me to talk about one of the wonderful, wonderful quality of life improvements they added to this game. Where
Loadouts, yes, I
now
know.
you have icon loadouts.
Yeah. Yeah,
Oh,
thank
thank
goodness.
God for that. Oh my God. Some very audible hooting and hollering was happening over here when I saw that was added.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So yeah, I created a whole new loadout and just had like put on all the Leviathan skills and some other skills to complement them. I didn't have to fuck up my original base game loadout. Because I could just go into the pause screen, press L1, switch right to it. If anything, I wish you didn't have to go into the pause screen to switch them out. I wish they found a button combination where I could just do it on the fly, like, outside of battles, but without having to pause the game. Oh
Yeah.
my God, what a beautiful thing. So, I mean,
Yeah, I'm glad they added that for sure.
yeah.
They
And
also added, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was gonna say, like, I probably would have been less inclined to try out all of Leviathan's toolkit if they hadn't added that, because I wouldn't have wanted to fuck up my base game loadout that
Totally.
I had gotten used to. But
I
the
was
fact that they added this, oh my God,
I
so
just want
good.
to be clear. It wasn't because I wanted to fuck around, or it wasn't because I was afraid to fuck around my
No,
loadout.
I know,
I
I
just
know.
preferred it. I could see the appeal of the shooting mechanics, um, but it just wasn't for. I liked better everything I had. Yeah,
You took an if it ain't broke approach. I don't, I get it.
yeah, yeah.
And
Delilah,
I'm glad that we got it early enough in the DLC so that we can actually use it and not late in the DLC where it would
yeah.
be useless.
That was my big like concern was, are they gonna wait till after we beat Leviathan, presumably at the end of the DLC, before they give us its power? And I'm glad that they found a way to make that not happen.
Yeah.
Um,
And it is
But
interesting how the boss arenas seem to get a bit bigger, maybe to compensate from the fact that you have more ranged options with those Leviathan abilities.
yeah,
mhm.
yeah, that's a good point. That was probably very intentional. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also noticed that they added whispers, I think that is what they're called, to that map that Vivian gives you. It's like a lore map.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that
The
was
Grand Cast, that's what it's called.
an interesting feature
Its inner
because
voice is it
I
for
feel
the
like it.
part we yeah.
No, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
I was just gonna say for the part we were at in the game, it was like they thought things that were relevant to that point of the game in the main game and nothing to do with the DLC. But
Well, I think if you go back to Vivian, they add in the events of the DLC, so
okay.
you can look at those events too and see thoughts that. But I'm just like, I don't know. I played around with it a little bit just to see what people's thoughts were, and I feel like a lot of them were so just generic, basic. Like this doesn't really add much. Like you look
I
at like
thought
Joshua and his thoughts on Torgal, and it just says like "good boy." I'm like, okay.
I mean he
What's
is.
that real?
Him
What's that really
also.
doing for me? Yeah, of course he is, but what's that really doing for me? Not much.
I was wondering, because again, we played this after beating the game. I was wondering if you played the game again, if they added the inner voices for the entire thing, and in which case I would have been interested to see the inner voice for Jill at the part before, like basically the entire game before you go to her Mother Crystal homeland area. Because a lot of like what she was thinking was kind of confusing for me in the beginning. Like she just seemed so sad all the time, and I wasn't sure if that was like an animation issue or an issue with the character. But it would have been nice to see her thoughts in those specific moments. So
I think it's supposed to be foreshadowing that she realizes that Shiva's dominant, which I guess would imply that that witch is a distant relation to her
Well,
somehow.
no, because I don't think no, because I think the only familial tie as it relates to like a dominant and an icon lies with the Rossfield lineage.
Okay,
They
okay,
make like a big deal about how Phoenix is always born under a Rossfield. But they don't do the same with the other families or the other dominants.
okay.
mhm.
So I was kind of hoping that they wouldn't do some reveal that that witch that was a former dominant of Shiva was related to Jill, and I'm glad that they didn't.
Yeah, and Jill
Because
was
I that would have just
already
taken away from I think her as a character.
she was already like a because she's a ward at the beginning of the game. If I remember correctly, she was of like the noble house of some peoples that the
Well,
Rossfelds conquered and taken in
not
as a
I,
ward.
I don't even think like a royal house or anything, just like the head of
Some
the northern
lord,
lands.
yeah, some
She
lord,
she was
yeah.
mostly taken to keep them in check, right? Like
Right,
she's a
that's what a
ward under
ward.
the Rossfields.
That's
Yeah.
what she's basically Theon Greyjoy. Yeah, she's a ward.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. But I don't think it was like a royal thing or anything. I think it was just like because the northern lands were mostly kind of portrayed as like barbaric.
Right.
So it was mostly just to keep the head of that land in check, which if you want to just say, if you want to call, because he's the head of the land, like if you want to call him royalty for a barbaric country, then sure, but I don't think it's like that kind of case or anything. But for what it's worth, though, I think you can, like, if you go talk to Vivian, you can like rewind to certain key points of the story and activate that.
Oh,
And
interesting.
like I think they retroactively added all that stuff. And it could be interesting to see like what she's thinking. More so, I think it'd be interesting to see what Annabelle, Clive and Joshua's mother,
Oh
was thinking at certain
yeah.
points very early in the story, as well as Dion, uh,
Mhm.
because of everything going on with Dion's father and Dion's brother.
Mhm.
And can I just say real quick,
Hmm.
as a in addition to that, because obviously both of these side quests incorporate, both Jill and Joshua and
Hmm.
Torgal. Kind of like if they feel like party missions, the parties are all going out to do these quests.
Hmm.
Even if gameplay wise they don't play that big of a role to many people's chagrin. I was really disappointed that in these quests that Dion wasn't going out with you. I
Mm.
wish, especially considering how much of an MVP he was in the base game for a lot of people.
Mhm.
Even
If
even if he's
any,
not even if he's not participating in the battles, even if he's just you just see him having, observing, and that also gives like some story opportunities because he's from Sambrek. He's not just from, he was the prince of
Mhm.
Sambrek, and the history that Sambrek has with the moats of water. That could have been interesting. But
well, it wasn't so much Sambrek as it was the Gregor. Well, I kind of don't remember exactly where the
isn't the
Gregorian
Gregorian
Church.
church like the foundation of Sambrek? Kind of
Maybe
like
I can't remember. That's a detail I can't quite remember. There's a
That
lot
sounds
of
maybe
right.
lore.
Yeah, I think you're right. Actually,
All
I
right,
remember
time to go talk to Tomes. Hold on, let me go. Let me
that.
load up the game. We'll go hit up Harpocrates and find out.
because I thought that like the emperor constantly refers to like his divine right from the
I
church,
Mhm.
and
mean,
he has church members at his council in the base game.
Yeah.
realistically, like to further your point a little bit, Jason. Like, I'm happy we got to, like, obviously with Rising Tide, I'm happy we got to get Leviathan's power and have a whole new icon to play around with too. And we'll actually too, and we'll get to that. Um, I do kind of wish that we got a DLC where we did play as a different character with a different move set.
Mm.
And Dion would have been a really cool character to get that with.
Mhm.
Like we talked about this in our main Final Fantasy 16 episode. Like I was really surprised and kind of disappointed that at no point did we play as Joshua as an adult. It was just when he was a kid for like 5 whole minutes,
Yeah.
and that was it. Otherwise you just play as Clive throughout the entire game. I kind of would have like, because 14 does this. For those who don't know about like what Final Fantasy 14 does, like there's certain single player duties throughout the several, many expansions that do put you in the shoes of another character, and you kind of have to learn on the spot a like piece of the toolkit that their job has. And it's really cool because for players that only play like one type of job, well, you get to experience a piece of another and kind of mix up the gameplay a little bit, and it's like these just really cool moments. I feel like a DLC for this where, the combat, not for nothing, it's great combat, but you really are doing a lot of the same throughout the entire game. It would have been kind of refreshing to get a DLC where we play as someone else, and we don't
The
really
pro-
get that.
so my counter to that would simply be like when you play as Joshua, that's a story beat, whereas like the DLCs are trying to be additive, and if you're playing as a completely different character, it can't be additive,
Well,
to the core experience.
I
And
don't.
and again, as I said in when we talked about the base game, uh, to advertise this, I felt like as an RPG was kind of wrong on Square. It's a character
Yes.
action game. It's a character action game. Character action game is focused on one character, in this case, Clive. I'm not saying it wouldn't have been fun to do that. Just I understand why they didn't, because they were trying to make these DLCs additive to that core experience.
Yeah, but
Maybe
at
as a
this,
story beat, like a brief story beat, you could have played as someone else. Yes, I can see that, but
I guess my point is, how additive do you need to be on a game that's already a 60-hour action game where you play as one guy? adding Leviathan as an additional icon was great. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have gotten that, but maybe the other DLC, rather than just being a breezy challenge room where you just play as Clive without many new abilities. Like, the only new things that you really get are accessories that do kind of change things up slightly, in that they're more interesting accessories than anything you get in the base game. Um, it's still just playing as Clive, not really gaining anything new to your kit, and fighting a bunch of back-to-back enemies and bosses. So having something where they mix it up a little bit would still be additive while also giving us something new to do versus just playing as Clive.
Yeah, in a perfect world, this DLC would have jived better for me overall. And it's not that I hated it or disliked it. I was coming off the boots of Shadow of the Erdtree, so everything sucked in comparison. But like even with
Foreshadowing
like
is a literary device, right?
putting that aside, like having put that bias aside, I was still thinking this game overall as a whole would have just been perfect if they deleted 90% of the side quests and those like bounty bosses, which I usually like in Final Fantasy games, and this one I didn't as much,
Mhm.
and just added Leviathan to the main game and this cool Omega fight to the main game, and let that be just one succinct experience for one price, and that's it, and not feel the need to like cut up what is good content and worth experiencing and then making it a DLC. And I'm not saying that they designed it with that intention. Actually, no, they did design it with that intention because the Leviathan was purposely left out. But I do think that like they had new ideas coming off the heels of the original game. I just feel like it would have been so much better of a whole experience and so much more memorable if they just focused on the good parts of this game and
I
deleted
agree.
all the extra shit.
I agree with you largely that as I just said earlier, this game is basically a character action game. Most character action games are short. It's hard to keep with that style of gameplay, keep somebody focused for 40 plus hours, whatever, with all the side quests. But as you alluded to, there are like 10% of the side quests with major story beats you can keep. Focus the game, make it shorter, and focus on those combat scenarios, which is why I think I enjoy these DLCs despite them not having too much story meat, is that they were very combat focused. I would keep the hunts, but because I think those also are good opportunities to show off the
Yeah,
combat.
I
But
personally also really liked the hunts, like, as a whole.
but yeah, this
Maybe I would have liked them more if the side quests weren't there.
yeah,
Probably.
I defend in our base game review, I defended the side quests, and I still stand by what I said, which was that while um, functionally they did very much, a lot of them felt like fetch quests. In terms of the actual content, the story content of them, and the world building, I enjoyed a lot of what they were trying to do. Um, but I can also see the flip side with which is from an overall pacing direction. It wouldn't be a bad thing to cut down the fat off the sides and focus more on the character action stuff. They probably just felt pressured to try to add as much RPG-ish or content style content like those side quests, even if they weren't entirely necessary.
Yeah, and which brings me to like my ultimate point is that this DLC adds side quests after you finish the DLC and after being jaded with the side quests in the original game and also just kind of liking how conclusive the DLC felt after beating Leviathan, I just didn't feel compelled to keep going. Um which sucks because seeing those green question marks after doing every green question mark in the original game aimed the shit out of me, but I just had to get over it and just say, all right, I'm not going to do this. And I know people will say like, oh, it's an RPG, which not really an RPG, which we talked
Yeah,
about in
it's
the
not really. It's a
original
character action
podcast.
game. I
It's
said it in
Yeah,
the
it's
base game review. I said it here.
it's trying to have RPG meat on the bones of an action game. Yeah.
exactly.
It's not really it's like it's so many small tweaks could make it feel more like an RPG, but it really just doesn't go far enough to really have that kind of identity.
Yeah, I think like again, I think you guys made the point. If it just leaned into the action adventure part of the game, I would have liked it a lot more. But even if this was an RPG, like there's a way to do like a concise RPG without it feeling like Fetch Quest City, and if that's your thing, like that's okay. It's just not my thing, and so it's always going to be a complaint for me when side quests just don't feel very relevant. And like I said, it was like 10 to 15% of the side quests that I enjoyed. For them to throw more at me just felt like they were just kind of trying to be like, you got all this time on your hands, right? Like this isn't going to be good content, but you're going to do it anyway. And I was
this
like,
isn't
you know
exactly
what?
a
Not
hot
today.
take. I think a majority of people, even people who enjoy the game, agree with you.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like besides the RPG aspects, like I feel like the other big criticism of this game is just that there's a lot of side quests and they just ultimately don't really break off from any formula. That's kind of like what I'm getting at as to why I kind of wish we would have gotten a DLC where we play as someone else, not just to mix up the formula a little bit, but because like this game didn't really have much else but the combat. There's no mini game to engage with. There's no like subversive gameplay. That the one brief moment is just a moment where you fought for that last 5 minutes where you play as a young Joshua. That's the only mix up of the gameplay that's throughout this entire game. Otherwise, it's just combat, which isn't
Yeah.
a bad thing because the combat was really good. I mean, I still have issues with it. You know what I'm going to say, cooldown timers. They absolutely could have balanced that whole aspect of the combat better. But the base the bones of the combat are really really good. The playing through these DLCs was still really fun because the combat is so solid. But there's
Yeah.
just not really anything else to do
Which
other
is
than
why
that.
I come back to, even if I'll defend the story content of the side quests, cutting them ultimately probably would have made the game much better by shortening the overall runtime, keeping it focused on the combat like a character, because there's nothing else to do besides combat in God of War, but you're on a much shorter guided adventure.
God of War
S-
2005.
yes, real God of War.
Yeah.
But and the same goes for like Devil May Cry or Bayonetta, which is why I ultimately, even if I like
Well,
a lot of
what
the
I'll
little world building done in the side quests, I agree with Delilah that they probably should have been cut to make that
what
very short but succinct experience.
what I'll at least add with Devil May Cry is at least Devil May Cry throws in like, a Resident Evil-esque puzzle or two throughout the experience. Which I also
Yeah,
feel like
sure.
this game could have used some of, because you go into a dungeon in 16 and it's just like you go to a room, you fight the enemies, you take the hallway to the next room, you fight some enemies. There's not really anything to figure out at any point. It's just linear pathway to fights.
Yeah, no, I
Even just
agree.
something menial as you gotta go through a small maze to find a key to go to the next area, like that would have been a little welcome than just
And to go back to God of War has puzzles.
yeah. God of War
Yeah,
has puzzles,
exactly.
Devil May Cry has puzzles,
And
like
platforming, yeah.
yeah. Um
But I agree. And I feel like overall, if we're just talking about Final Fantasy 16 generally, they had a vision that looked a lot more like a game like that,
yeah.
but were hindered in the back of their minds, and rightfully so, because it would be a concern if you're making the next big Final Fantasy installment. Final Fantasy fans are not expecting that. And
Yeah.
obviously, from the release of the game, there are a lot of fans that did not enjoy what their vision was. I respect that they kept to their vision as much as they did, and would have more respect if they had just gone all out and
Yeah.
gone full barrel with that vision the way Delilah's talking about.
And you know what? To be fair, like this isn't like anything new with Final Fantasy. There are people that don't feel that Final Fantasy VII is a real Final Fantasy game. Or have had this sentiment in their heads since 7 came out.
Like the original, or
Like the original
yeah.
7. Yeah, yeah. Like this has always been a debate. What is Final Fantasy? And it's been a decades-long debate of people missing the point of what the franchise has always been about. But that's also another hours long discussion
Yeah,
that I don't
because
want to
that's like,
dive into right now.
yeah, because that's like, I've actually never heard of somebody not thinking seven. I'm going to taking you at
It's
your word for
mostly
it, but
it's less about the gameplay and more about the aesthetic and setting.
this, yeah,
There's people
which
that
is
have
hilarious
that.
because six is steampunk. Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
I know. None of it makes sense. And you know what? I'm sure if we really go back and try to find evidence, I'm sure we would find some that of people claiming that 6 isn't a real Final Fantasy game because it's not in a fantasy world. It's the steampunk set, it could go on and on and on. But it's just decades of people missing the point of what the franchise is actually trying to accomplish. And that's something I would really love to talk about, but not in this episode.
Yes, that's again, as we've said over and over, these are hours long conversations.
Yeah.
What I do want to talk about real quick is I guess since you guys kind of just finished this DLC and closed the game, you didn't go and grab the final icon that you can obtain.
No, I didn't
What the
even
fuck?
realize it was a thing. Yeah, because you didn't let us know that there was this
I
important
guess
post-game thing.
well the game kind of teases it. I think Ultima says something to you about it, or maybe there's a little thing that pops up and says, "Hey, go talk to the fucking Already Stone in the hideaway to get a super special surprise." And if you do that, if you go back to the hideaway and you go interact with the Already Stone, you'll get a cutscene of Ultima giving Clive, now that Clive is a complete vessel with the final icon that was missing, he gives Clive a taste of his power, and your final icon is Ultima.
Yeah, that would have been great to have maybe after the first DLC, at least,
Yeah. Well,
maybe.
at the very least, like more to do with it. So they did add this mode at the Already Stone called Kairos Gate, and it's kind of like a roguelike mode where there's 20 floors. I wouldn't know. I don't know. It's like a roguelite. Let me say roguelite because there is a distinction between the two, like and
Yeah,
light. There's
which is
20 floors.
another conversation.
Yeah, I know. There's 20 floors. The enemy encounters are all static, but you get points that you can either put towards buffs for the entire run or buffs for a few rounds. And you can and your equipment is all static too. So the only thing that you can really equip Clive with to change him up is the icons and the abilities that they have. So your power and your defense and all that stuff doesn't matter except within the purview of the upgrades you can get in that mode. And if you get to like floor 5 and you die, you start from the beginning and none of your upgrades carry over. So it's this kind of fun mode, and that's kind of I guess where if you want to play along or play around with this new Ultima power that you get, like that's the only place to do it unless you haven't done all the other side content or played through the game on Final Fantasy mode yet. Which I already had, so this was literally the only thing I could really do with that stuff, unless I really want to replay the game again. But anyway, yeah, Ultima's power is pretty cool. It's like a really, really powerful icon, and almost kind of negates my issue with the cooldown stuff because most of his skills have a really low cooldown. Uh, it's just kind of overpowered, but it's really neat.
Cool.
And it was like a really neat addition for them to give you. It's just, yeah, kind of questionable of the time that they give it to you.
Yeah, and I guess like it's good motivation in case I ever miss this game to go back and do New Game Plus and play it on the hardest difficulty.
When you
But
realize how much you miss platinum in games and like are desperate to
yeah,
spend a lot of time on things over and
yeah,
over. Yeah, I
which
hear you.
will never happen. But I from that perspective, it is more motivating to go and play New Game Plus, knowing that there's that and also the Leviathan ability to continue playing with. Uh,
Yeah.
but I'm glad that I didn't do it just because at this point I'm good, I
Yeah.
got what I needed out of the game and it was fine.
If anything, I kind of want to go and beat the game again, just like do the final boss with Ultima's power against him,
Yeah.
just to give him a taste of his own medicine, the bastard.
Also, just the fucking music and cinematic interludes of that fight so fucking good. Like
Yeah, I mean,
I can literally associate in my head when I listen to those tracks, like which part, like what sequence am I in the fight? Am I in like that's how good like the the direction, the mixing of the audio component, the visual component, the gameplay component was for that. So even
and
if the fight's not necessarily the hardest, it's just so memorable that, I mean, not as good as the Bahamut. I think everybody agrees the Bahamut fight was the best, but
yeah, but it's also just a testament to how good Soken is at as a composer.
Right.
Yeah.
Of his own melodies, of his own tracks, but also how often he dips back and reuses past melodies to kind of tickle our nostalgia. The people that know. I mean, Jason, I have to imagine you're going through it quite a bit with Dawn Trail, without spoiling too much, with some of the
Callbacks,
musical
yeah.
callbacks. Yeah, yeah.
All right. I mean, is there anything else you guys want to talk about with the DLCs as a whole before I move on to the final question?
No?
No,
Okay.
they were fun.
Oh, I guess they're yeah. If we didn't mention it before, they also did add like a glamour system where you can glamour over whatever weapon you have equipped with another weapon's appearance, which I think is a
Yeah,
neat.
much needed.
Yeah, if you really don't like the look of the ultimate weapon, I guess you could glamour over the Buster Sword and have Clive use the Buster Sword, because that was a thing that they let you have in the DLC. So
That's cool.
yeah, that's neat. That's cool. Um, okay, if nothing else, I guess we'll move on to the final question, which I guess we've kind of been talking about a little bit, but um, this franchise has been continuously pushing more and more toward action gameplay versus like slower turn-based gameplay. After revisiting this game a year later, do you still feel like that's the way to keep going with this franchise? Is there anything you'd change about, and this is kind of like a broad question, not just with 16, but we have the 7 remake trilogy that's been doing this and having its own kind of things, and not saying what would you change about those games or this one specifically, but like from a Final Fantasy 17, I guess what now do you think you would want from that game that kind of is the same or different from the ones we've been getting recently?
My position remains the same. It was the same position I had before this game was announced. We talked about it going all the way back to when we talked about FF7 Remake. My position has always been pick a lane, either commit to
Who's a
action or
lane?
commit either commit to action or commit to turn-based, because trying to mix the action with the ATB system as they've been trying to do, from just a theoretical design perspective, it is a fantasy, so to speak. You're never going to get any of the
Will
set
we be its
features.
final witness?
Yes, we will, with the remake trilogy. But you're never going to get the best parts and the most satisfying parts of either when you try to combine them because they're antithetical. Um, if I had to choose, I would definitely choose turn-based over action. It's not that I want Final Fantasy to become purely action like this, but I prefer that to trying to engage in unsatisfying mixtures, which is why I was happy when it was announced that they were just trying to go with a more pure action thing. And I enjoy, as I said before, I enjoy this combat very much. But if you're asking me what I would prefer for 17, just do fucking turn-based combat.
Well,
The
and I don't
formula
even
was
just
written in the
mean
90s, and it's still better than anything they've done since.
I don't even just mean like necessarily like turn-based versus action, but like what lessons could they take from 16, from 7 remake, from 15, which there's plenty of lessons to take away from that one. And like what would you want
15
to
isn't even a
see?
game. 15 is hold square. Which is
Hey, say what
ironic
you will
because
about
which is
15.
ironic because, like, let's be honest, both you and I were super hot
Yes,
over it when it first
yes.
came out. We were like, "Oh, it's our game of the year." We even said it was our game of the year. And then
One
like a month or
day,
two later, we're like, I think we were wrong on that.
one day I would
It was a
actually
sugar
love
high.
to one day I would actually love to for us to on this show revisit 15 and
Oh
kind of
God.
reevaluate it. But that's going to be that. I feel like that would be a whole project because not only is it like a fairly long open world RPG, it's got how many DLCs and updates that have iterated on it and stuff like that. Plus, I don't know that we ever talked about the movie. These other core pieces that are pieces of the puzzle. Otherwise, you're left with an unfinished puzzle. Um,
Yeah, I just feel
but
like looking at 15, 7 Remake, 16, and even Strangers of Paradise, all of those games had
oh
like
yeah,
different types of action. And I feel like with the exception of 15, I think the combat worked for all of those until Rebirth got like way too, it just did too much with the combat. I preferred I can't even with these names.
Remake.
Yeah, there you go. I was gonna say reunion, but that's not even a thing yet.
It will be a thing.
Yeah.
No, well, I mean, we won't.
Yeah.
Go listen to our Crisis Core or Rebirth episodes for that, I guess.
I felt like all of these games worked in the Final Fantasy elements into it while feeling like Final Fantasy but being different. And I like it, and so I don't mind them going the action route. And I think with 16 specifically, using that like Mega Man action combat was sick. Like I really miss being able to use like boss abilities. You know, after you fight a boss, getting their ability and then being able to use in the game. That's not something you see nowadays very often. It's sort of old school at this point, so that was kind of refreshing. I just don't want Final Fantasy 17 to be just like 16 or to even be just like 7 remake. I want them, if they're going to stick to action, I want it to be a new, refreshing look on action like they have been. I feel like Final Fantasies as a series has always reinvented themselves in terms of combat and stuff while still keeping the characters and the vibe and the things we know and love about the series. And I just want to continue to see them do that.
Yeah, I guess since you're almost setting me up for this mini rant, but like, I alluded to it earlier, about people missing the point of what Final Fantasy has been trying to accomplish since the beginning. It's never been about the gameplay. It's always been about the presentation. It's always been about having the cutting edge graphics for the time, cutting edge story for the time, music, just the presentation of it all. It's always been about them presenting the best looking, the best presented possible thing to you at any given time. And that's why, even people look at Seven's graphics and saying, oh, it hasn't really aged well. Well, at the time, that shit was a miracle.
Yeah.
It was
getting a fully 3D
game. Yeah, it was the most expensive game to make ever at that time. Yeah.
Yeah, and for a while after too. Like at the time that these games come out, they really are like the best of the best, at least in terms of how they look, how they appear, and the story that they tell to the audience. It's why so many Final Fantasy stories resonate so much with so many people, especially when they play them during their childhood, because it's like probably from childhood growing up, it's probably one of the best stories they've ever experienced.
Mm-hmm.
Through that adolescence and stuff like that. So that's really always been the point of Final Fantasy, and that Delilah, your point of you don't want them to make 17 like 16, they absolutely won't, because they never do that. They even during the ATB days where we got like 6 consecutive mainline games using the ATB system, you can't play all 6 of those games and tell anybody that they're identical.
Mm-hmm.
The systems in 4 are completely different to the systems in 5, from 6, from 7, from 8 and 9. Like they're all different, even if some of the framework is still the same. There's so many differences between them that it's reductive to just say, oh, they play the same. They're turn-based.
Yeah.
They use the ATB system. So 17, whatever it will be, it will not be the same as 16. We will not get the same action gameplay. Hell, if anything, it's almost antithetical to Final Fantasy for Rebirth's combat to be so similar to remakes, because even the 13 trilogy changed up the gameplay with every single one.
Mm-hmm.
Like even that trilogy of games, each one was so vastly different from the one that came before it. Even though they're they're siblings to one another, they're related games. It's sequel after sequel.
There's an evolution, yeah.
Yeah.
And one can even argue that, given Toriyama's involvement, that the remake trilogy was an evolution on 13, but that's a story for another time. Another 2-hour conversation.
That's a debate that we're not going to get into that one.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, okay. I think for me, for 17, like it's gonna be action based. Because besides the fact that they're just for turn-based games, I think they are leaving that to the kind of more nostalgic-driven franchises, Octopath Traveler, Bravely Default, like those games, the ones that aren't as marketed as highly marketed as AAA, the ones that don't have as much name recognition, those are going to be relegated to appeal to people that want that turn-based nostalgia. But Final Fantasy, they've already said that 16 largely went action-based because they didn't think a mass audience would want to play a turn-based game. And unfortunately, even though there is a large audience for turn-based games now, they're probably right. It probably still wouldn't have gotten as much of an appeal with a mass audience if it was a turn-based RPG. Not to say that a turn-based RPG could never get a mass audience again.
Yeah,
because
that's a fallacious. There's a fallacious argument. Just you
well,
don't even have
I
to
think
go that deep. Persona 5.
right. That's the example I was going to bring up. I think now that Persona 5 is as big as it's become, like it's possible. I'm not saying it's impossible.
And
But
even before that, Pokemon. Yeah, like
Pokemon is a different kind of situation.
Dying. That's what happens when you don't go with the technology and you just keep iterating.
Yeah, that's
kill cells.
Pokemon is a whole other can of worms, though. I mean, it's never been even remotely the same as the same kind of RPG.
Okay, Baldur's Gate. The only point is I'm trying to make is that the idea that
Also not the same.
the idea that like turn-based will never be as popular and never sell as well as depends on the quality of the game.
Yeah, but I didn't say that, right?
No, I know you didn't. I'm saying
Yeah.
other people generally. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm not saying it's impossible, but there is logic to the decision to go action based, and we could have the sales of Final Fantasy 16 have been so annoyingly contested. Same thing with Rebirth. It's been so annoyingly contested. Did it sell well? Did it not sell well? Is Square in trouble? Like, shut up. At the end of the day.
Yeah, that opens up just a broader conversation of the cost of game development in general.
Yes.
How much that they sell. Will they have to go back to turn-based just to have cheaper development cycle? That's a whole another 2 hour. We've said this.
Well, I guess where I'll leave it at is like the mechanics don't need to change. It's because the budget doesn't come from how deep the mechanics are or what kind of game it is. It comes back to what Final Fantasy has always been about: presentation and creating a cutting edge graphical showcase that Final Fantasy's always been about. That's where the expenses come from. And if that's not going to sell well, then the franchise is in trouble.
My only caveat there, I don't think it's been about the presentation in the sense of creating a streamlined narrative experience in opposition to Western RPGs of the 90s, which were very much non-linear choice-based, like fully fleshed RPGs. But yes, I agree that over time, the level of visual technology that was employed became increasingly focused over time. But originally, it was just the narrative presentation, creating the narrative experience.
Well, yeah, and I'd say that if anything, that's simply because there were a lot more limitations on the Famicom and NES.
Yes.
But you can't continue that argument into the SNES days. They were cutting edge at that time. That time.
I'm more saying what the focus of the people behind it was.
Yeah, no, I know.
Yeah.
But it's still more for longer during the life of the franchise. That has been the goal more often than not, or for the longest period of time, right? Because we're now looking at 36 years. The last year was the 35-year anniversary, so 36 years of this franchise existing. For over 30 of those, the goal has been cutting edge presentation. That's what the franchise has been about longer than not. So
yeah,
that's what the goal for 17 most likely will be, regardless of what kind of game it actually is. They could make a first-person shooter and call it Final Fantasy. As long as it has cutting-edge presentation and the best story that they can tell, then that's what justifies calling it a Final Fantasy game. Though a lot of people are going to have an even bigger issue with that if it's
Didn't they
Like a
do that
first-person
with
shooter.
Dirge of Cerberus? Like,
That
I
was
know
a
it's not
third.
main line,
That was
but
a third-person.
third person,
shooter,
right? But
actually,
still,
Delilah.
you
I think
know.
I think it had a first-person mode if you really wanted to play first-person.
Ah, I see.
But Dirge of Cerberus did have some pretty cool RPG mechanics. I gotta say, you had some pretty good RPG customization in there. It was a not a great game, but did have some interesting ideas.
Yeah.
Tune in for that when we inevitably force Jason to play Dirge of Cerberus Final Fantasy VII.
Nope. Nope.
They'll probably remake it. I
Not
don't
happening.
Oh, come on. Come on.
A thought actually just came up that I wanted to praise real quick about this DLC when you brought up Pokemon. I thought about how they for the final fight against Leviathan they gave you the most unfair Pokemon battle. Thankfully, this game does nothing with elements, but like theoretically, water should like beat fire always. But I did like that on Ifrit. He wasn't fully. He didn't have so much flames on his body. He looked kind of like simmered a little bit when you were fighting Leviathan, which would make sense elementally, right? Until you did like the special attacks, then you would see the fire off his body. But I thought that was a nice little detail that he looked a little damp.
I don't even know if I.
Noticed.
No, I don't. I don't even know if.
Because, like in the other battles, you'll see him very fiery and flamey, but in this battle, he was kind of brown with like low flame.
It's kind of
Maybe
brown.
I just read into it.
I don't know. You might have a point. I'm not sure. That might have been intentional. I just don't think I really noticed.
I was expecting it. I was expecting a Joshua combo in a flight section like Bahamut because you're at that point in the story where that's already been a thing. I guess
Yeah,
that's
but they
part
really
of my other
wanted
disappointment
to.
with that fight.
Yeah, they really wanted to make Shula your companion for most of this DLC. So even though Jill and Joshua were a prerequisite before doing these DLCs, like they kind of get shoved aside anyway to make room for Shula. Which, yeah, kind of a slight disappointment, but it is what it is. Oh, I didn't even follow up on the thing I brought up earlier. Yeah, Famiel, the guy that was selling the dusk shards. The side quest after you finish Rising Tide. Yeah, you find out that he's Shula's brother.
Oh, okay.
That's the connection. Is he's a member of that? He's a member of the Moats of Water, and that's what he's doing to try and support their community.
Huh.
He's selling the dust crystals to get them by. So
like
that side quest, huh?
It sounds like a drug. Dust crystals.
Hey, want to buy some dust crystals?
Got fucking Skinny Pete in there getting those dust crystals. Badger.
Yo, man, I'm Skinny Famiel. But yeah, the side quest where you kind of find that out is they're doing this initiation ceremony to fully bring Wallius as a member of the community, and that requires the mother, the father, and a witness. So Shula and Famiel act as the mother and father just because they're actually related, even though they're distant, like grand niece and nephew, whatever you want to call them. And Clive acts as the witness to do this ritual thing for to kind of make him one with the community. It's a nice little epilogue side quest to the story of the DLC, but that is ultimately one of the two, I'd say, main connecting lines between Echoes of the Fallen and Rising Tide is kind of how that Famiel and Shula are part of the Moats of Water, and that's the connection, and the fact that there's two artificial mother crystals at play that are kind of the catalysts for everything. So
I'm glad to see that the side quests were not absolute garbage.
Well, that one, was pretty cool. Some of the other ones were like, there was one involving like the Tonberries, and like it was the Tonberries. Yeah, we didn't even talk about the fucking Tonberries. They're terrifying.
Yeah,
cool,
I love
but
what
terrifying.
they do with them here.
Yeah. So there's like a side quest line that involves the Tonberries. There's one that involves like finding the grave of that witch The former dominant of Shiva, that was pretty neat. And yeah, overall, nothing too important, but some of them were good, especially that epilogue one that kind of reveals Famiel as the as Shula's sister. So,
Cool.
anything else before we wrap this bad boy up?
No.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, everyone. If you liked this episode of Reap the Spoils, if you're listening on YouTube, thank you so much. Leave us a comment. Tell us what you want Final Fantasy XVII to be like. And what you liked and didn't like about this episode or the show in general. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Share the show with your friends, your family, your pets. Maybe not your kids. Maybe unless they're old enough to hear the profane language that we're spouting out on a regular basis. If you listen to us on Apple Podcasts, thank you so much. Please rate and review the show, 5 stars preferred. Tell us what you like. Tell us what you don't like. If what you don't like is Jason, please don't leave us a review saying that, because we know and we don't care.
I'll entertain it. If you hating me makes your day better, that's fine.
If it gets you by, sure. If it gets you off, maybe don't do that. But
Imagine.
I don't know. Maybe they should.
Hey, Delilah, what's our next episode on?
Sorry, I'm so excited. It's Elden Ring. Shadow
God.
of the Erd Tree.
Delilah's just like, we've been talking about these shitty ass games. Let's talk about some Elden Ring.
God, I hope I don't have to write like a whole 2-page notes thing. Elden Ring was our only
Going back to
episode
the
where I
dung
ever
eater,
had to.
baby.
Elden Ring was the only episode where I ever wrote 2 pages of notes, so I desperately don't want to have to do that again, just because I had to do a lot of wiki reading to gather all the key notes that we needed to talk about Elden Ring. But hearing what I've heard, I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it. So.
Yeah, it won't be 2 pages. You'll be good.
All right, cool. I like to hear that. So yeah, tune in next month for our Elden Ring Shadow of the Erd Tree episode. And yeah, as always, thanks for listening.
Bye.
Have a wonderful whatever time of the day you're listening to this, people.
Wait, we didn't get a Kwasnicki rating. Sorry.
Oh shit! What was the Kwasnicki rating? Yeah, go.
So I originally gave the base game a 9. I would actually, in retrospect, reduce that to a 8 for the base game.
Okay.
And honestly, these DLCs, I don't know how to rate them on their own, because they're basically just like addition. They're not like their own.
Supplemental, yeah.
Yeah, they're basically.
Yeah.
If I had to, I guess a 7
for both.
Yeah, for both.
Okay.
But like overall, the game, I give it an 8 out of 10. I revised my original score of the base game from. It's kind of like with 15, that initial high of a new Final Fantasy game, although obviously not as drastically lower in retrospect as 15 was.
Yeah.
All right. Fair enough. All right. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Because there's a
Is Mark just repeating for you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because there's
No.
I hope it's recording. Yeah, I hope it's recording so
he can see what we went through. Cause
there's
He's I wonder if that's how the freaking 80-year-old infant in this game felt.
Oh my god.
Just getting frozen and not being able.
That was hilarious. That just made my day.
Alright, what happened?
So you froze, but
you hear it.
We heard you, so it froze and you saying is cause there's but then it just kept repeating. So it was cause there's and me and Delilah were just sitting here laughing and hoping it's on the recording so you can hear it.
This is so I don't know what the fuck keeps going on.
Your audio is weird now, yeah.
It's like robotic.
Well, now it's because now there's gonna be a shift because now I have my AirPods in and I'm recording off of those. So it's gonna sound a little off, but I'm not gonna waste time rebooting again just to get this thing working. I don't know why it's not working, and I'm not gonna deal with it right now.
Plus, we're almost done.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're almost done. So, I don't. I think we're pretty much ready to wrap up, right? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
okay.